Hello. The video you are about to see contains images of dolls only.
Careful, Tyler, darling. You're drinking it too fast. It'll all go down the wrong way. That's a good boy. And you're dribbling all down your cheek. Oh, pass me tissue, please, Icky. Thank you. Come on, let's wipe your face. That's better. You silly boy. You're dribbling, silly Tyler, darling.
Oh, hi, Impy. Are you feeding Tyler? Don't you want to do Magic Memory Sunday today?
Oh, Tara! I do. Here, Icky. You take it. Just very careful. He's still having his bottle. Hello, everybody. This is Lacey. It's so good to be back with you on a Sunday again.
Yes, it is, isn't it? All right, then. What do you want to remember?
Icky and me wants the story of Doctor Banty when he took his bath.
All right, then. Ready for the magic?
Yeah.
Magic voices fill the air. Magic memories take us there.
Close your tired eyes. Angels are above you. Watch them as they fly across the skies. Great big moon is shining. Stars begin to peep. Time, my little Tyler, darling, was fast asleep. That's my only lullaby. There, Tyler, darling. Now you go fast asleep. I can do it, boy, for Mommy. What, you want another lullaby? Oh, well, all right then.
Now, Impy, please don't be naughty. I said you could sing Tyler Darling a lullaby if you got straight into bed afterwards, and you said you would.
I didn't promise.
Impy.
But my Bert, Tyler isn't sleepy yet. Neither am I.
Oh, Impy, darling, please don't make me have to call Mummy. You don't want Tyler Darling to sleep in the den because you were naughty, do you? Come on, give him to me. I'll put him in his crib.
There he is. Good night, Tyler, darling.
There we are. Now, please get into bed like a good girl.
Oh, you're mean. Oh, good night, Tyler, my precious. Oh, come on, Icky. Let's get into bed, Icky. Oh, there's no point, though, is there? He's far too hot. Oh, isn't he? Oh, goodness Jesus. There. We're in bed now, my butt.
Well, come on, Impy. Are you going to let me come up, or are you just going to lie there and sulk? Come on, give me a hand if you want a story.
All right. Goodness Jesus. Oof.
Oh.
Your hand's all sleepy.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Ah, there I am. Well, you're not the only one who's hot. I do wish it would get cooler. All the little babies are finding it so hard, even though we try to keep them cool with fans.
I bet all the little birdies and aminos find it hard when it's hot too. And they can't turn the tap on and get a drink of water or just have a nice cool shower when they want. Can't they, mind, Bert?
No, they can't, Impy, darling. Well, that reminds me of a story I've been meaning to tell you about one of your best friends.
Oh, who?
Well, it's the story of how Doctor Banty got to take a bath.
Really? Oh, we'd love to hear about that. Wouldn't we, Icky? Now, lie down, Icky. At once, I say. You be quiet, Icky. Don't you dare interrupt on Bert while he's telling us, Icky, because I know what you can be like. Now, lie down. Snuggle up. We're ready now, my Bert.
OK then, here we go. An unusually hot summer had come. It blazed unmercifully over the countryside like a blowtorch blazing over a creme brulee. There had been no rain for weeks. The water in the ponds and streams was low and muddy. Some had dried up altogether. The grass was dry and brown. The leaves on trees and shrubs were parched. Everything was coated in a layer of fine white dust.
Oh, goodness gracious, oh dear.
At the farm, things were not too bad for Rocco Rooster and his wives. The farmer's wife gave them food and water. But the heat made them very uncomfortable, especially Rocco, who found his thick feathery coat made him far too hot.
I should think it would. He's so fluffy.
Over at Miss Polly Peckle's cottage there was also plenty of food and water, but Doctor Banty was very busy indeed. As the only doctor for miles around, he was always being called out to some poor bird or little animal who was suffering, and it was usually either heat exhaustion or not being able to find enough to eat. Dr. Banty and Mrs. Connie were very generous, usually giving food from their own supplies to help out, even if it meant having to go short themselves.
Oh, that was so kind of them.
Yes, it was, Impy. But as the days dragged by and there was still no rain, food and water began to grow shorter and shorter, and Dr. Banty began to get worried.
Poor darling Dr. Banty. He's so lovely.
One day, Dr. Banty came home very late. The sun had blazed down all day long, and even though it had long since grown dark, it was still very warm. He came into his little house and dropped limply into a chair. Mrs. Connie bustled about getting him a meal. Mrs. Carley put a cool cloth on his head. Mrs. Cayley fanned him energetically with her wings. And Mrs. Clear could do no more than sit on the arm of his chair and look adoringly at him.
Oh, I'm so glad he's got them all there to take care of him.
So am I, Impy. Dr. Banty just sat for a while, letting himself be fussed over. But quite soon he looked up and spoke in a brave stab at his usual manner. "There, there, bandages and bonjello. No need to fuss, me dears."
He's so funny.
"Nonsense, Banty," said Mrs. Connie, placing a tempting platter of salad and a bowl of roasted grains in front of her husband. "You've nigh wore yourself to threads and tatters looking after every bird and beast hereabouts. It's time someone looked after you." "Splinters, splinters, that does look good," said Dr. Banty, digging into the food. "No doubt you're right, my dear, but it's very worrying. These poor birds and beasts are getting too hot. They overheat and exhaust themselves, don't you see? We can help them if they run out of food. Miss Poll's good like that, but how can we keep them cool? Nettle and dehydration, I don't know."
You'll find a way, Banty.
Mrs. Clear stroked Dr. Banty's head affectionately.
You always do.
"Zinc and castor oil, corsadel and chloroform," exploded the good doctor. "Keep your wings to yourself, my good hen. What am I, a kitten?" But Mrs. Clear took no notice, because she could see a pleased look deep in Dr. Banty's eyes.
Oh, how lovely. I do love him so.
Dr. Banty still hadn't thought of a way of helping the animals stay cool the next morning, though. He came down to breakfast wearing a worried frown. "Put a bit of something into a bundle for me, Connie, my dear," he said. "Cough drops and cotton balls. I have a list as long as my wing today. I shan't be home for lunch. Expect me when you see me. Oh, and I want to fly over to the meadow if I get time. I must see how the Spicky Sparrows are faring. I do hope none of their brood has come down with anything."
Oh no, I hope not either.
Dr. Banty bolted his breakfast down and flew off into the sunshine. He had a very busy morning, but just about lunchtime, when the sun was getting very hot, he found himself quite near the meadow where the Spicky Sparrows and their children lived. He was about to fly to the Spicky's nest when, as he was flying over a garden, he spotted them. There they all were, sitting in a large bird bath, with a blackbird or two, a thrush, and a big noisy starling.
Oh, the lovely Spickies. They're my friends.
Yes, Impy, there they are, you see. Dr. Banty flew down to them. The thrush, the blackbirds, and the starling flew away, but the Spickies knew Dr. Banty, so they were very pleased to see him.
I bet they were.
And how are you keeping, Doctor?
Said Mrs. Spicky, splashing cool water all over her back. Dr. Banty watched her enviously. Well enough, but I wish I could get in there with you. Oh, wet wipes and water mist, yes. I wish there were these types of baths big enough for bigger birds and animals. I have patients wilting in the heat, and I don't know what to do for 'em. All they need is a way to cool down, don't you know? Hand wash and hairspray.
Oh, poor Dr. Banty. I wish he could find a way.
Oh, you wait, Impy. Mr. Spicky put his head on one side. "You wants to find a place where there's a pool in the garden, Doctor," he said. "Then you can use it for the bigger birds like you, your wives and such, and the animals." "But, Mr. Spicky, lemsips and lozenges, all the ponds are drying up." Dr. Banty was almost crying.
Oh,
Nah, Mr. Spicky soothed. Not them kinds of pools. I mean the kinds they get for smaller humans to play in. If you look in gardens, you can see 'em. The big humans fill 'em up with water. Then the small humans splashes about in 'em. They're not very deep. They can't be, or it wouldn't be safe.
a paddling pool.
That's right, Impy. Dr. Banty was so excited at this idea that he completely forgot to thank Mr. Spicky. He forgot all his other patients too. He soared up into the sky and flew all over the countryside that he knew, looking for a pool in the garden. He looked for hours till it was starting to get dark, but he couldn't find one. At last, very, very tired, he flew home. He was so ashamed of himself. He had forgotten his patients, had allowed himself to get overexcited and gone on a complete wild goose chase.
Oh no, poor Dr. Banty.
At last, Dr. Banty saw Miss Polly Petal's garden below him. He flew down and could hardly believe his eyes. He alighted in a tree to get a better look. There, on Miss Polly Petal's lawn, was a large circular thing, which he had never seen before. It had water in it, not very deep, and 2 small girls were sitting in the water, splashing each other and sailing toy ducks.
Oh, just look at that. Miss Polly Petal's got a paddle pool.
Yes, as Dr. Banty watched, Miss Polly Petal came out with towels, called the 2 girls, helped them out and dried them. Then they went inside. Dr. Banty didn't waste one moment. Perhaps Miss Polly might take the bath away. He flew down at top speed and rushed into his house.
Oh, what's he gonna do?
I'm about to tell you. Connie, Carly, Kaylee, Clea, come here. Bath bombs and bubbles, come here at once. The 4 bantam hens rushed out to him, and he led them across the lawn to the big circular thing.
Oh, heavens, Banty,
Said Mrs. Connie.
what is that?
It's a bath, said Dr. Banty, and it is going to help us all get cool. And with that, he fluttered into the air and landed plop in the cool water.
Oh, how lovely.
Mrs. Connie hesitated, but a moment later she did the same.
Oh, it's lovely.
She said,
Come on, you 3.
and they all did, and soon they were splashing around, getting themselves cool all over, ridding their feathers of the horrible dust which seemed to have got into every one of them.
Oh, that's so wicked.
It was. What they didn't know was that Miss Polly Petal had been watching them from out of her kitchen window. Now, Miss Polly Petal was a very kind lady. She had been getting very anxious about her bantams, to see them growing limper and more dejected every day, and she had been wondering what she could do for them. When her 2 little nieces had come to stay, she had bought the paddling pool to amuse them, but now she knew it would do a lot more than that.
Oh, how wonderful.
It was Impy. So after that, every morning very early, Miss Polly Petal would fill the pool. Then she would leave the garden quite empty and watch to see who would come to bathe in it. Rocco Rooster and his family would often come. If it had been really hot, animals who normally didn't like the water would come. She would see Dr. Banty leading a family of rabbits to the pool. They would quickly cool their fur and then scamper off again. In the afternoon, she would thoroughly clean and refill the pool for her nieces if they wanted to play with it. The summer blazed on over the countryside, but thanks to Dr. Banty and Miss Polly Petal, the animals and birds found the heat a little easier to bear.
I do love Dr. Banty.
I know you do, Impy. And that summer, a lot more of the birds and animals came to love him too. And I'll tell you something else. When he was sitting in that paddling pool bath, surrounded by his wives, maybe Rocco Rooster and a couple of his wives, and other friends he had made, he was so relaxed that he forgot his usual ways and chattered as hard as anyone. Dr. Banty was learning what it was like to be really happy.
Oh, Bert. Oh, I love my Dr. Banty. And I love your stories. And I love you.
I love you too, Impy. I do.
Come on now, let's snuggle up for the song, shall we?
Oh, no. Tiny Dolly's trying.
Oh, now, Impy, that's naughty. He isn't crying, he's fast asleep.
Oh, but it's so hot.
Think about Dr. Banty's lovely cool bath and you'll feel cooler. Oh, come on, Impy, darling, it's late.
All right. You know something, my Bert?
No? What?
Me and Dr. Banty like each other. since I stopped being friends with, well, you know. And I had Everrose, and we do things together, and I stopped doing that nasty rainbows. I'm learning to be really happy now, too.
I'm glad, darling. But come on now. No more stalling. Let's sing our song.
All right. You want to snuggle and swan song? Hands together, eyes closed. Love you, Bert.
Come on. Love you too, you horrible imp.
One
Evening as the sun went down and the jungle fire was burning. Down the road came a pretty maid and she said, I'm never turning. I'm going to a land that's far away, beside the crystal fountain, where there's peace and joy for each girl and boy. It's the big rock candy mountain. Oh, the birds and the bees and the lollipop trees, the ice-cold soda fountain, where the lemonade springs and the bluebird sings. It's the big rock candy mountain.